Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We are very glad to have you here today with us. If you're here, please do say hello in the comments section. Let us know where you're from. Let us know that you're here. Make sure if you can hear me, just testing out the audio. So hello everyone, we're going to be getting started very soon. I'm very excited for the presentation today. And there will be a Q&A segment after the main webinar presentation. So if you do have questions during the webinar, feel free to put them down below and we will get around to them. And yeah, just say hello to everyone. Let us know where you're from. Let us know what type of writing you do. We'd be really interested in seeing all that. And you can feel free to connect with others in the comments if you'd like. We're going to have a very good presentation today, and I hope that you will that you'll enjoy it. We're going to get started in just about a minute or so. I want to make sure that everyone can get in, that everyone's seeing me, that the audio is good, or seeing the screen, that is. And yeah, and we will be starting in just about a minute here. So like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to pop those down below as well, and we will get right around to it. All right, and since it's 3 where I am, I guess we will go ahead and start. So hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Ian with Writing Launch, and I'm the head instructor at Writing Launch, and today what I've put together for you is a presentation on basically 3 tips that I have, 3 big tips for finding freelance writing work. Finding freelance writing work is one of the things that I get asked about the most, and it's definitely one of the most confusing parts about being a beginner freelance writer. I've gotten so many questions from people who just don't know where to start. They don't know where to look for jobs, and the big thing that I always get is that writers are afraid of not being able to get work because they have no experience. So what I want to do with this this webinar today is to give you a little insight into the tips that freelance writers use, and I really hope it's going to be useful for you. So without further ado, let's get into the webinar itself. So let me bring this up, and here we are. So today everything is going to be coming from our No BS course on freelance writing. That's where I'm going to be drawing all the information from, and I'm actually going to be talking about some things I've never talked about before in webinars. So if you've seen any of our previous webinars, you're going to learn some new information, and if you're new, welcome. I hope you have a good time today. And again, there will be a Q&A segment at the end of the webinar, so if you have questions, just let me know, and we will get around to them after the webinar presentation. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about 3 tips for finding freelance work. And the first tip is to find your hotspots. And I'm going to go into detail on all of these, so don't worry if these don't make sense at first. But the first one is find your hotspots. The second is to write for online publications. And the third is to build connections through repeat business. And this is the sort of the new stuff, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So let's get into it. So by find your hotspots, what do I mean by that? Well, when I say hotspot, I'm referring to a website that provides you with good freelance writing jobs. And that's basically it. Hotspots can include job boards. They can include social media sites. Reddit and LinkedIn are 2 really good examples of that. I use Reddit a lot for work, and I know that LinkedIn is very popular for finding work as well. So if there's social media sites where there's maybe groups on the site that can help you find work, that's a good example of a hotspot. Social media groups. And there are many more examples. These are just a few, but basically anywhere that you can find jobs online, that can be considered a hotspot. But it's also considered a hotspot because it provides you with good freelance writing jobs. So not all job boards or social media groups for job finding, not all of those are hotspots. And I'm going to get into how to find hotspots that work for you. And it's important also for me to say that these aren't going to be universal. So what works for you may not work for someone else, just because there's so much writing work out there. Some job boards are specifically focused on certain types of writing, and that may not be the type of writing that you do. And so what you're going to need to do is just find hotspots that work for you, and I'm going to get into some ways on how to do that. But just keep in mind that just because someone tells you that, oh, I found some good jobs here, keep in mind that may not be true for you, but it doesn't mean that you won't find any. So there are hotspots out there for everybody. So how do you find hotspots? Well, there are a few important ways. The first is really to just take a look at the popular places. So popular job boards, sites, and groups. One of the most obvious examples that comes to mind is Indeed or Monster. You can also go to maybe the jobs section at ProBlogger or Freedom with Writing. These are all really good popular job boards and sites and groups that I think will serve you very well. And you can also ask other writers where they find their jobs, because you might have someone who knows where the hotspots already are, and especially this is really great if you already know writers who are in the same industry or the same niche as you, writers who do the same kind of writing work as you, because this can really pay you dividends. Because if your writer friends know where to find the jobs, then they'll be able to tell you where you can find jobs. So that's a really beneficial way of finding these jobs and hotspots. And over time, you're just going to kind of naturally find out which sites give you the best jobs. And of course, this requires trial and error. And it can take a while. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It can take a while to find out which places are hotspots for you. But I don't want that to discourage you, because really, as long as you're searching for jobs, as long as you're applying for jobs, then that is progress. It took me a while to find the hotspots that worked for me. I tried a lot of different places. The two places that worked for me in the end were Freedom with Writing and Reddit. I tried stuff like LinkedIn and ProBlogger and Indeed and a bunch of other job boards and a bunch of newsletters and things like this, but none of them really, really worked. And that was just because of the type of writing that I did. It wasn't the type of writing that was in these newsletters or on these job boards. And you've probably run into that. If you've looked for jobs, you may have had this feeling of like, oh, why does it seem like there's nothing for me? And chances are you just weren't looking in the right place. So don't get discouraged if it takes a while. It can take you upwards of a few months to even a year to find a place that really gives you a lot of high quality jobs. Now, you don't really know if a job board or if a website is a hotspot at first, of course, and you have to learn how to evaluate it. But how do you do that? Well, what I would recommend is looking at a lot of different factors. First, the volume of available jobs, right? That's important. If the job board or the hotspot, quote unquote, is slow, if it doesn't really have a lot of job postings, that may be a problem. You want ideally a hotspot that provides you with a lot of work, or at least it has a lot of consistent availability in terms of jobs. So that's something to pay attention to. And also, of course, the quality of available jobs. I look at the job postings, see what types of jobs are there. I check to make sure that it's in line with what I do as a writer. I check to make sure that it's a good job posting, that it has a lot of detail, that it doesn't leave me with any questions. I just check to make sure that it's a high quality job posting. The quality of job postings. And when you're looking at these, you want to assess both the job posting itself and the job itself. So for instance, if you find, let's say you do marketing writing and you want to find a job, and you find a job posting that is looking for a marketing writer, and that seems to be a really good job for you. But let's say the job posting is kind of vague and cryptic, and it doesn't really answer your questions, and it kind of seems a little shady. That would mean it's a low quality job posting, and in that case, it might not be the right job for you. So you need to take both of those into consideration when you're looking at these job boards. And you also want to think about the kinds of people you're going to be working with. And this was a big one for me because I've kind of learned over time that different job boards and websites have different types of people that come to them. And so you're going to want to think about that and think about what your ideal client is. What industry are you in? What niche are you in? What is your ideal client? What is that? What do they look like? What do they do? And you want to think about type, volume, and quality. So some of the things we already talked about, you want to make sure that there are a lot of clients available, that there are high quality clients available. You want to make sure that the people that you talk to through this job board are, responsive, and they're descriptive, and they answer your questions when they need to, or when you ask them, that is. And like I said, you want to think about the audience, the kind of people that come to this job board. What kind of client base does the hotspot attract? Because when you're looking at a job board and thinking about the audience, that audience is your prospective client base. So the kinds of people that this site attracts are going to be the people that you will maybe be working with. And you want to think about if that demographic matches what you do as a writer. And that's very, very important because, like I said, each job board kind of attracts a different type of person, a different type of client. And so if the kind of people that a site attracts is not in line with who you want to work with as a writer, then that's probably not the job board for you. But on the other hand, if the job board attracts the right kind of people, then it will likely be a hotspot for you. So those are some ways to find hotspots. And this is a really important step in the whole equation. And the reason that I made this the first tip is because I think it's one of the most important. This is something that I've relied on heavily throughout the years. I've used myself Reddit and Freedom with Writing, like I said, and I still go back to those sites. I still get clients off those sites. I still get work from there. And that's because, just they've proven to be in line with what I do as a writer. There are jobs in the same niche. It's really, really beneficial. And I've relied on those so much. So whenever I need more work, I just go to those places first because I know that likely I will get work. And it's good to have that sort of reassurance, especially, because as freelance writers, we often have a lot of instability and uncertainty. And so it's nice to have places to come back to that will have a high chance of working for you. So the second tip is to write for online publications. And this is something I've talked about a lot before, but I preach this so much because it's one of the most important things that you can do as a writer if you want to get started in an easy way. Like I said, it's a great way to get started contributing to online publications. An example might be, writing an article for a Smithsonian magazine or maybe Forbes, and really any sort of online publication, whether that's, a blog, a news site, or whatever. It's a great way to get started because the barrier of entry is so low. It's really quite easy and it requires no experience. You don't need a portfolio to get started. And, like I said at the beginning, this is one of the things that writers always ask me about. They always say, I don't have any experience. I don't have a portfolio. I don't have any work published. Can I still get jobs? And I always say yes. And this is always what I recommend to them. So you don't need a portfolio to get started because, it's all about your work. It's all about what you have to offer. You don't need anything to build on. And that's because just many publications that accept freelance contributions, they don't require you to have any experience at all because they're not interested in, your past work. They're interested in what you have to offer them. And these publications are going to pay much, much better than content mills and freelancing platforms. I was on a freelancing platform for about 6 months to a year. It was something like that, maybe 9 months when I was starting out as a writer. And I was just making pocket change. It was really, really bad. The pay was abysmal. The clients I worked with, I didn't even have a choice because, you just get assigned work. And I made the jump over to writing for publications and getting jobs through like Freedom with Writing. And that just transformed my career because I was suddenly, working with the kinds of people that I wanted to work with instead of just whatever the freelancing platform threw at me or, just the kind of jobs that I was able to get. It went from sort of that to, oh, I'm writing about stuff that I want to write about. I'm getting paid a lot better. I'm able to actually make a living off this. So if I hadn't made that jump, I wouldn't be able to be here talking to you now about all this, because I wouldn't have been able to build a career out of it. So that just goes to show how, important this is. And like I said, I preach this all the time because it was so instrumental for me as a writer, and it's what I built my career on. So I really have writing for online publications to thank for, where I am today. Now, if you're wondering how to get started, it's really pretty easy, and we're actually going to make it easier for you. So the first step is to just find publications in your niche. And this is really simple. You probably already know a lot of the publications in your niche. If you don't, then use Google. It's really easy. I'm going to go over a brief tutorial, but it can be really easy as just searching, publications in gardening, or publications in finance or whatever, and you'll find a good hefty list of them. But more on that in a minute. So let's look at an example search, because I'm going to briefly discuss something that I've talked about before, which is advanced Google search operators. And these are just things that you can add to your searches to make them more specific. So you get a higher, the results you get are more relevant to your interests. So let's say you are in the spirituality niche and you want to search for publications. What would that look like? Well, here's one example. So you type in spirituality, which is your niche, and then you type in the plus sign, and you type writer's guidelines in quotation marks. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but essentially the writer's guidelines page, if you're not familiar, is the page on a publication. If they take freelance contributions, this page will tell freelance writers exactly the rules to follow to pitch articles to them. So you put that in quotation marks. And the reason that you do that is because when Google sees quotation marks, it will bind whatever is in the quotation marks together. So if you typed without the quotation marks, it would return results that maybe had just the word guidelines or just the word writers. But by connecting them with the quotation marks, you're returning results that include the specific phrase writer's guidelines. And then the plus sign just, appends the two. And there are some variations on this in terms of the phrasing you can use, because the writer's guidelines page has a few different names. It's also known as the Write For Us page, submission guidelines, or guest post. These are all phrases and sort of buzzwords, if you will, that you can enter to have a higher chance of finding publications in your niche that will accept contributions, because these are all, if a site has a writer's guidelines page, or a Write For Us page, or a submission guidelines page, or a guest post page, then they will accept freelance articles. And again, if your niche, obviously if your niche is in spirituality, you just change that out for whatever you want. But even just knowing these simple tips can really make a difference. I learned these advanced Google tricks several years ago, and they've served me so well. I use them all the time, even when I'm searching stuff just for fun, because it will make sure that I get more accurate results. And so that's really important if you want to get the most relevant results for what you're searching. And of course, look at publications you already read. And this is really ideal because you'll already be familiar with the publication. I'll go into this in a little bit, but if you're not familiar with a publication, you'll have to spend some time getting familiar with it. And it makes it so much more seamless if you can just have a familiarity from it or with it from the get-go. That's the ideal scenario. And again, ask other writers. Other writers might be able to tell you, oh, here's where I've written, I know the editor's really nice here, or I know, this publication takes a lot of articles, or this publication would be a good fit for you. And this just, is really the importance of having other writers in your network. And if you don't have other writers in your network, then feel free to actually comment below. I hope that some of you can connect. If you need more writers in your network, just, say me or something like that, or I would like more writers, because I think that would be a really cool use of our time here together, is to be able to connect some of you. And hopefully, if you're in a certain niche, you're in a certain industry, you'll be able to find other writers who are in the same industry, and then get some tips and leads on publications that way. And of course, you want to study each publication. What I would recommend is reading at least 5 to 10 articles and analyzing them. And you want to analyze them for tone, style, for topic, all these things. Treat it like a piece of literature, and think about how is the writer writing? What kind of tone are they using? What kind of voice are they using? Is it lighthearted? Is it serious? Is it formal? Is it casual? These are the things you want to be thinking about when you're analyzing these articles, because that will tell you what you should be doing to write for the publication. And again, if you want to read more than 10, go ahead. Definitely, that would be ideal. And like I said, it's really best if you're already familiar with the publication, just because that familiarity will come in handy here. But if not, I think 5 minimum, because otherwise you won't really get a good sense of the tone and the voice and the style across a publication. And if possible, read new articles, but also some old ones. And you don't have to read them, you don't have to pore over them, but you do want to look at them, analyze them, scan them for hints of style and whatnot. And you want to think about who the audience is. This is incredibly important, because when you pitch an article, and we've talked about this before in previous webinars, but when you pitch an article, the benefit that you're pitching to the editor is that the audience is going to enjoy this article. That's the sort of the promise you're making. That's your value proposition. And so if the editor can be convinced that you know the audience and that you know what they like, then they will, they'll give you the job. And so thinking about who the audience is really important. You can usually get an idea by looking through the comments section and looking at their social media accounts. Sometimes the information might be on the writer's guidelines page. A lot of publications will tell you these are the types of people we write for. They'll give you guidelines to stay within to meet their branding. Again, this is all really important stuff to think about. And, basic question, but really important one, is what kind of articles do they publish? And this is why you want to read at least 5 to 10. You want to get a good idea of the range and the scope of what they publish. And you want to think about, a lot of different things, topic, tone, etc. Topic, style, tone, voice, all these things you want to be thinking about when you're looking at these articles, when you're analyzing them. And again, this will kind of reflect your approach to it, because let's say you tend to write in a really casual voice, or really informal style of writing. If you're looking at a publication and you notice that it's a really almost academic, a more formal way of writing, then you probably won't be a good fit right off the bat. You'll have to modify your writing style if you want to get into that specific publication. So that's an example of where looking at this and analyzing it is going to really come in handy. And again, look for the writer's guidelines page. And this is so important because this page tells you literally everything you need to do to successfully write for the publication. So, read it carefully, cross your T's, dot your I's. There have been so many situations that I've heard of where, editors will reject people who don't read the guidelines and who don't follow them. And it's really obvious to an editor when you don't follow the guidelines. Especially, if they've been doing it for a while, they know, and it just becomes really obvious. So make sure that you read all of the guidelines and follow them carefully, because if not, your pitch could be rejected, and then, you might not have a future at that publication, or even, your article just might not get in. So that's really, really important. Now, I said earlier that we're going to make this easier for you, and I know that, at least for me, finding publications was a bit difficult when I didn't know where to look. So what we've done is made this amazing paid publishing guidebook, which is a compendium of 654 magazines and websites and blogs that pay writers. And so we've taken a bunch of lists and condensed them into one convenient place, and we're going to be sending this to you for absolutely free, just as a thank you for staying with us, for watching the webinar, and for supporting us. So we're going to send this to your email in the next few days. I really hope you'll enjoy it. I've gotten so much out of this resource that it's ridiculous. If I'm looking for a certain publication, I can just go here. It's categorized by niche. So you can just, if you're in the business niche, you can just go to the business section, and it's all there. It gives you all the information about writer's guidelines, and it gives you links to the writer's guidelines pages. So it's really, really convenient, and I hope you'll enjoy it. But of course, this is isn't the only thing you need to write for online publications. You also need to know how to pitch well. And we've talked about that before in previous webinars, which you can find on our YouTube page. But if you are still kind of new to this, then we want to make sure that you are taken care of as well. So we're going to give you my road-tested pitch template. What I did for this pitch template was I looked at all my successful pitches and I thought, okay, what makes these similar? And I noticed that across all my successful pitches, there were a lot of similarities. And so what I did was I kind of compiled all of their similarities and made one sort of ultimate pitch. And that's what I'm going to be sending to you today or in the next few days. But basically, this is a template, an outline that you can fill in. And of course, I would recommend you customize it a bit just to make it in your own voice. But it's a really powerful tool. And we've had so many writers have successful pitches because of this template. And I really hope it helps you. I know it's helped a lot of others. And it's a great resource if you're new to pitching or if you just want something different to try when it comes to pitching. And it's a lot shorter than you might think. So if you're out there sending long pitches, then this template will definitely be interesting for you and could very well be a game changer. So again, these two bonuses will be coming to your email over the next few days. You don't need to do anything. We'll be sending them right to you. Now let's get into the new stuff. And I'm really excited about this because this is something that just has helped me so much, and it's something that I really haven't emphasized before, but it's critically important. So let's talk about the network side of things. Your network as a freelance writer is critical, and the stronger your network, the more jobs you're going to get, and the higher the quality of those jobs will be. So, your network is just obviously your connections in terms of clients and business people and coworkers and friends and family. This is incredibly important because if you don't really have a network, then you don't have anything to fall back on. I have a pretty decently sized network. It's not huge, but it's enough for me. And that means that, if I need work or if I need help or, if I'm looking for opportunities, I can talk to someone in my network and I can, easily get work or easily find new opportunities or something like that. And repeat clients are so integral to the health of your network and your career. I can't stress this enough. Repeat business it often makes the difference between really successful freelance writers and not so successful freelance writers. Not all the time, but a lot of the time this is the case because if you can find a good repeat client that is a sort of a long-term client relationship, that can be so beneficial for your career because you will keep getting work. And it's really common to develop these sort of long-term client relationships that give you steady work on an ongoing basis. I have one client that I've worked with for the past, I think, over 3 years, and we've not only become good co-working friends, as it were, but I keep getting work from him, and it's a great symbiotic relationship where there's a client who needs a lot of writing work done, and if they work with you and if they understand, okay, I know this person's going to do a good job, then they'll want to come back to you because they trust you, and that's so powerful. And this can also mean that you might get referred, and referrals are also key because word of mouth is just every marketer will tell you it's the most powerful and most trustworthy form of marketing. It works much better than any sort of advertisement or any sort of marketing because people tend to trust what their friends and family and coworkers say. If you get recommended, let's say, a restaurant from a friend or a family member, you'll likely check it out. But if you see an ad for it, you might be a little less persuaded to do so. So referrals can be so crucial. I've gotten some of my best jobs from referrals. And it's this great sort of, like I said, word of mouth thing where a client that you worked with says, hey, I know this person did a great job. Here's their information. And when you get connected that way, when you have that pre-existing connection with someone, it can be so powerful and get you even more jobs. But how do you maximize the chances of repeat business? Because going into a job, you don't always know if it's a long-term job or not, and I'll go over that in a second, but you don't always know. So how do you maximize your chances that you're going to be a repeat, that you're going to get a repeat client? Here are some ways that I found work for me. First, you want to treat every job as if it's one of many. You want to kind of go in with the mindset of, even if it's a one-off job, you want to go in with the mindset of, okay, I'm going to do the best job that I can, assuming that we're going to work together for a long time. And follow up after the task is finished. And this is really important because a lot of the times, clients will have writing work that they need done. That's, that maybe they didn't think of at the moment, or maybe that they just didn't tell you about, because a lot of clients will kind of test out writers with smaller jobs. But in any case, a lot of clients have writing work that they need done that will exceed the scope of an initial job. So even a simple just saying, is there anything else you need help with, that can often do the trick. And even if they don't have any work immediately, they might have some work a few days or a month or a few months down the road. And having that repeat business is just so important. I've had a lot of clients who I don't hear from for like a year or 2 years, and then they'll come back to me after that time just because they had such a good experience with me, and they trust me and they want to work with me again. And so this is just so powerful to have that sort of connection with someone. And again, this can get you referrals. It can get you, a bigger network. It's really, really good. And of course, if they say yes to this, you've got a repeat client. But what if they say no? Well, in that case, what I would recommend is just simply, politely asking the client to pass your name along to anyone who they know who might need writing done. And this is sort of basically asking for referrals, but it works really well, and it doesn't come off as, too gimmicky or too needy, just because, at the end of a job, the client's happy, you're happy. You just say, hey, you've enjoyed working with me. If you know anyone else who needs stuff done, can you pass along my name? And 9 out of 10 times they'll say yes. So this is a really good technique to maximize the chance that you'll get a repeat business. And even if you just ask that, your name will be kind of floating around in the client's head, and so that will also increase the chances that they might come back to you in the future if they have writing done, or if they have writing needs. And again, this is also a great way to expand your network through word of mouth, getting referrals. I think it's single-handedly the best way to expand your network, because then the trust factor is so high, and you'll have a great lead into these new jobs. And on that note, if you're after long-term jobs, then that's what you want to seek out. You want to seek out long-term jobs because a lot of jobs will be just one-off jobs. So if you're looking for this, you want to look for job postings that do describe bigger projects. Short-term jobs do tend to be one-off projects, and with these kind of projects, you usually are not going to get repeat business from them. Again, that's not an always sort of thing. It is just sometimes. It really depends on the job, and it depends on the client. Now, you may grow your network from these jobs. If you have a one-off project and you say, hey, can you pass my name along, you might get a referral from that. But it's more likely that you won't get a repeat business than you will. But so that's why you want to look for long-term projects, whether someone's looking for maybe an in-house writer, or, just the scope of the job posting is bigger. I'm thinking something like, we need a writer in this position versus, I need, a biography done for myself. That's obviously a short-term job. Whereas saying like, we need a writer in this position, or a marketing writer or something like that, that is likely to be a more long-term job. And this is something I learned the hard way, but don't count on clients to be long-term, and don't even count on your long-term clients to be long-term. Even if you are years into a good relationship with a client, don't put all your eggs in that basket. I alluded to this earlier, but I have a client that I've worked with for the past 3 years, and I love working with him. But there will be periods of maybe a month or even a few weeks where he just won't have any work for me. And so in that time, if I had relied completely on him to bring my jobs to me, then I would be out of luck, and I would be, financially kind of not in the best place. So, that's why I have a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. So even if you have a long-term client, don't get comfortable just, like I said, putting your eggs in that basket. Because even repeat clients can just, like I said, vanish, and some can even, quote unquote, fire you. And this can happen even after, years, because sometimes, clients' needs change, or maybe maybe it's a long-term project and it's finally ended. And so what I would recommend is, not even getting comfortable with a few long-term clients, because even if you have like 3 or 4 or 5 repeat clients that are long-term that you've worked with for months or years, they can vanish or fire you. And so it's really prudent if you try to vary your jobs, and always be looking for jobs even when you don't need them. That's a big thing, and that's something that, like I said, I learned the hard way. Now, all of this said, given those 3 tips, and I hope these have been helpful, I briefly wanted to go over some frequently asked questions. And like I said, we'll have a Q&A here in a few moments. And if you have questions, please do pop them down below. But I just wanted to go over some frequently asked questions so that maybe if you're thinking this, I can answer it for you right here and now. First question, like I've talked about earlier, how do I get my first job without any experience? Because, some people might have experience but no published work, and so they want to know, how do I get that first job, that first piece that I can put in my portfolio? And what I always say is to focus on your pitch, and don't make it a big deal that you don't have experience, because a lot of clients and editors don't care. They want good writing. If you can deliver that to them, then you'll get the job. And so you want to really focus on your pitch, on your value proposition. You want to make it about them and not about you. Don't try to sell yourself, sell your benefits. And that's a big thing that, I could talk for hours about, but I'll keep it condensed here. And like I said, clients and editors want value, and they want you to deliver value. They want someone who is reliable at delivering value. And if they're convinced that you can do that, then they will choose you. And a lot of writers don't do this. A lot of writers, just sort of blab on about themselves. I'm sure we've all been guilty about that in the past, trying to sell ourselves instead of our writing. But it's really an ineffective way of doing things. So focus on your pitch, focus on your value. Another question we get a lot when it comes to freelance writing is, does location matter? And very rarely does it ever matter. And that's one of the great things about freelance writing, is that you can become a freelance writer from anywhere in the world, no matter where you are. The only exception that I can think of would be that there are some local or regional publications that are, specific to a certain area. For example, I know there's a magazine that covers it's like a Georgia magazine, the state, not the country. And they obviously want only writers from the state of Georgia. So that's like one example that I can think of. But aside from that, location does not matter. So whether you're in the US or Africa or Asia or wherever, Europe, Antarctica, it doesn't matter. As long as you can write and you have internet access, that's really all you need. Another question that we get asked a lot is, I don't have much time to write. Can I still pursue freelance writing? And the answer is absolutely. You don't need a lot of time per day to really build a freelance writing career. If you know what you're doing, even an hour a day is really enough time to build a career. And again, I want to make sure that we get to the questions, so I don't want to go on for too long about this, but I do want you to be kind of informed about this. So we're going to be sending you a third and final bonus on maximizing your writing time. Now, this is a really good, if you're kind of finding yourself strapped for time, then this is a really good resource. It's a short guide that tells you what you can do to get more writing time out of your day, to recover lost time. And in fact, this is such an interesting topic that we have an entire course on it, but this is just sort of a short condensed version, so you get all the short and sweet bits, and I hope it really helps you if you find yourself kind of struggling to find time. If you're busy, this guide will definitely help you, so look out for this. And again, we'll be sending all of these bonuses to your email. You don't need to do anything. We're going to be sending them right to you. So with all that in mind, I hope you enjoyed the webinar presentation today, and now we're going to open it up to the Q&A, so please do ask your questions below. We have about 25 minutes-ish left. I want to make sure that I don't take up too much of your time, but I'm very glad that and very appreciative that you've decided to spend some time together with me today. So if you have any questions on the material, on anything I talked about, on really any aspect of freelance writing, let me know, and I will get to them. So let me switch this back to my webcam. little software change there. So yeah, let's get into the questions. If you have questions really about, and like I said, any aspect of freelance writing, I would love to help you out for the next 20-25 minutes or so. All right. I'm seeing some really good questions already. Let's see. We have a question. Oh, this is a good one from Jerry or Gary. I think it might be Jerry. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Despite being a writer, I'm not too great with names. You mentioned content mills and freelancing platforms. So what are these exactly? That's a good question. They're essentially the same thing, but a little different. They're essentially sites that promise freelance writing work, but that sort of use it as a service. I'm thinking of sites like Upwork and Fiverr, where you essentially apply to be a writer for the site and they'll just sort of send you jobs. The difference here is that a content mill usually means that you'll get a lot of writing work, but it will be very low quality, very low pay. And this is essentially just, companies are outsourcing the cheapest writers they can find, then you're essentially signing up to be one of those cheaply paid writers. And freelancing platforms have a little more appeal to them, and they're essentially where you can, where the site provides you with an audience, but you have to, take some sort of, cut, whether that's in terms of pay or not choosing the clients you get to work with. Fiverr is a great example of a freelancing platform. And on that note, we have another question from Carolyn, who asks, what do you think about Upwork for writing jobs? I really don't like it. I don't like any content mill or freelancing platform. And the reason is because freelance writing is like, there are so many options to be a freelance writer. And when you introduce a middleman like that says, hey, we'll give you an audience, but you have to, we'll take some of the money. I don't believe in that, because there are just so many ways that you can find clients and editors to work with on your own, and you can retain 100% of the profit. And another problem is that sites like these have really sort of cheapened the landscape of freelance writing. It used to be that, in the days of, pre-content mill, freelancing platform, it was much more common for writers to get paid really well. And now, there's always a writer who can do it cheaper than you. And it's because of these mills and these platforms. And so they really just undervalue writers. They treat writers like a commodity. I'm not a fan of them. I have heard of some writers using Upwork specifically for good jobs, but I don't like the whole setup. I think, especially if you have to, make bids on a project, and essentially, I've heard Upwork described as a race to the bottom, and that's a perfect description. I really don't like it. I really am not a fan of it. But if you do use it, go in kind of knowing what you're getting yourself into. But again, I wouldn't recommend it, just because like the tips that I discussed in this webinar are much better than that. So yeah, and if you're on Upwork right now, I want you to know that the alternatives that I suggested will work for you. Even if you don't have any experience, even if you don't have anything published under your name, it can still work out really well for you. Let me see. There is so many good questions. Keep them coming. Let's see. Okay, we have a question from Diana, who asks, I don't know what to charge for various writing projects. Can you talk about how prices are negotiated? And it looks like we have a couple questions about how to charge. And again, this is going to depend so much individually, because essentially what you want to do is make enough for yourself to live, right? And so you have to kind of calculate that. You have to calculate, okay, what's my overhead? What's my cost of living? How much do I need to charge to make that happen? Something I'll say, I'll throw out a couple of ballparks here, but I don't want you to take these as gospel, because there are just so many factors to take into account here. What I recommend to people who ask me and to our members at Writing Launch is to not go lower than about 7 or 8 cents per word. And I don't really like per word that much. I prefer per project, and I never charge per hour, because I don't believe that hourly rates fit freelance writing well. And if you're charging hourly, I would recommend that you change that rate, because with hourly rates, you get incentivized to spend longer on jobs to get paid more. But project rates will ensure that you get paid for the work you do, for the quality of the work you do, and not the time you put into it. But back onto the figures that I was talking about. When we're breaking it down to a per word rate, I would recommend no less than 7 or 8 cents, and that's because anything less than that is really undervaluing yourself. On average, I'll get paid anywhere from 15 cents to $1 or more per word, and so you definitely want to be as high as possible on that scale as you can. And the other figure I'll throw out is that we're talking about rates, like I said, no less than 7 or 8 cents per word, and definitely. Like I said, I wouldn't suggest per word rates, and definitely not hourly rates. So I hope that helps answer the question. But it's a really good question. It's one that so many people wonder about, and of course it's going to vary from industry to industry. So you're just going to have to do a little bit of research, but also don't let the market sort of absolutely define it, because again, it comes down to what you need to make to live. Here's a really good question from Caroline, who asks, is there value in creating articles to add to a portfolio? So I'm assuming what you mean by this is just sort of just writing articles to put in a portfolio, not publishing them anywhere. And we get this question every time we do a webinar, is just like, can I publish work on my own blog or on my own site and then use that for my portfolio? And I always say no, because when you're publishing, and this is something that so many freelance writers don't think about, is that when you're publishing an article, it's not really about just, getting published. It gives you social proof. And what clients and editors want to see when they're asking for experience, when they're asking for your portfolio, is to not only see what work you've done in the past, but to see, hey, someone else has paid for this person's writing. Other people think that their writing is good enough to get published. And that gives you so much credibility in the eyes of your clients and in the eyes of editors. And so when because anyone can publish something on their own blog or site or portfolio, right? I could write an article, in the next half hour and just pop it on my portfolio. Would it do a lot for me? Probably not, because it's just sort of, it exists. I mean, it shows my writing ability, sure, but it also doesn't say anything about, where am I getting published? What type of a writer am I in terms of that? So I always say no. And at the same time, it's a lot more difficult to do that approach, I think, because if you go into this with the approach of, I want to get published, I want to, create valuable content for companies and for websites and all this, it's a lot easier to get published than you might think. And then you kill two birds with one stone, and it's really, really more beneficial. So, I definitely don't think that that's the best option. You can do that, and I know that some writers do, but again, I wouldn't recommend it, just because there are so many better options out there. Here's another common question we get from Sarah, who asks, what's the etiquette in submitting the same piece to multiple publications simultaneously? I 100% do not recommend this. And this is again something that most freelance writers don't think about, right? Is that publications today are, they're picky. They don't want to work with just any writer. And a lot of publications are really niche. So think about a publication that you read, actually. Chances are the articles on that publication aren't super general. So if you see a headline from that publication, it's from that publication. And what I'm getting at here is that most publications today want exclusive content that is geared toward their specific audience. And if you have an article that's great that could kind of fit on 5 different sites, then you've kind of written it for none of those sites. It's sort of the maxim, if you've done something for everyone, you've really done it for no one, right? Because if it's so general, then it's not going to be optimized for any specific audience. And this is also why I don't recommend submitting entire articles to publications. I recommend finding publications that just want pitches, because then if they say no, no skin off your bones. But if you submit an entire article to a publication and then they say no, that's a lot of time that you've wasted customizing an article for that publication, and it can't go anywhere else. So definitely I'm not into multiple simultaneous submissions. I don't think it's doing yourself a good service as a writer. But that's a really good question, and it's something that I think every freelance writer wonders about. Let's see. I'm seeing so many good questions. Tonya asks, or Tanya, I believe, sorry, do you recommend to be an expert with a degree in the niche you choose to write in? Okay, so do you have to have a degree in the niche you choose to write in? Definitely not. I think it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of writers, especially a lot of members, who have this sort of imposter syndrome where, since maybe they want to write about something that they like, but they have no real experience in, like maybe it's a hobby or an interest, but they feel like, oh, I don't have a job in this field. I'm not qualified to write about it. And a lot of writers feel that they're not qualified to do this. Now, let me kind of approach this from the opposite perspective. There are a lot of things that I've written about that when I've written about them, when I've gotten them assigned, I had no clue hardly about anything. And you know what I did? I Googled it. I looked it up. I looked at it from a stance of what are other sites saying? What are these top articles saying? How can I apply that to what I already know? And how can I make this a better article? So essentially what I did was I took existing articles and just improved upon them. I compiled information, so it was much more of that sort of approach. But it goes to show that you don't need even to have really any experience to write about something. Now, of course, do I recommend that? Not always, no. But I don't think you should be worried about not being qualified, because as long as you have knowledge of a field, like what clients and editors want is not necessarily, high level experts. I mean, that's great, but they're really looking for anyone with a unique perspective on a topic or on a field. And so I think that's what matters more. And it's with the whole value thing. You don't need experience if the editor or the client is convinced that you can deliver something valuable to them. By the same token, you don't need to worry about experience if the editor is, if they can, or editor or client, if they can tell you just have experience, that you have interest in the field. And usually it's easier to tell. Like I said, editors and clients kind of have a keen sense of knowing when you know something or when you don't. It comes off very transparently. So even if you don't feel qualified, if you're interested in a topic, if you have knowledge of a topic, that is more than enough to write about it. So I hope that helps you, and I hope that helps just break this sort of imposter syndrome, because like I said, it's a really common problem in terms of something that a lot of freelance writers feel. So yeah. Well, just a few more questions, then we'll call it a day. Let's see. We have a good question from, from Dale, who asks, what is the best way to go about finding clients who need white papers? I think this is an interesting question, because I think this can sort of be extrapolated to be what's the best way to go about finding clients who need this sort of job. And this goes back to what I said about Hotspots, is that after a while you'll get a sense of looking at a job board or a website or a group and being able to tell, like, this has the kind of jobs that I'm interested in, or it doesn't. Something I would recommend is just putting a lot of effort into your hotspot search. And also, if you're looking for something specific, use those Google advanced search operators that I talked about earlier in the webinar, because those come in handy. I mean, so much. Like I said, I use them all the time, even if I'm not searching freelance writing stuff. They just come in handy because they allow you to really use Google to its fullest capacity. And there are so many more than what I went over. It can look like an algebra equation if you have enough in there. But that's a really good way of finding really specific things that you're looking for. Here's a good question from Jessica, who asks, what are some emerging niches to keep an eye on? And alternatively, which niches are really losing relevance? That's a really interesting question. It's interesting because over the years, it's something I haven't really noticed, because I think there's always going to be a market for anything that people are interested in. And while, there are some niches that are really timeless, like, business, finance, parenting, these are things that are always going to be relevant. But of course, those are very general. It's when you get specific that you start to see kind of where the relevancy starts to become less present there. I think when you're covering specific trends, I think that's when it can get into the risk of losing relevance. Something that comes to mind is like Fortnite, which you might have heard of. It's a very popular video game. And it's sort of the thing of the moment, and there are many, sites and a lot of content centered around that game. Is it always going to last? No. It'll probably die out in the next few years, and then all those sites, all that work will be kind of gone. So that's the sort of topic I wouldn't recommend kind of focusing on. And emerging niches, that's an interesting question. I think if you have any sort of experience in the arts, I think there are just so many new art forms emerging, and a lot of new kind of socially progressive publications and niches that are coming out. I think that sort of stuff is going to be important for the future of the writing landscape. But definitely, like I said, there are some things that are just going to be always timeless. And if you focus within those general niches, like, for example, I write mostly about marketing, which falls under the umbrella of business. And that's something that, people are always going to be interested in. So I don't really need to worry about losing relevancy or anything like that. But that's a really good question. It got me thinking. So thank you for that. Carolyn asked, do you play that guitar behind you? I do indeed. I've been playing for how long? About 13 years or so. So ever since I was a little lad. I always appreciate those kind of offbeat questions. Thank you, Carolyn. Let's do 2 more questions, then we will call it a day. Here's a good question, and I briefly touched on this, but this is a unique take on it. We have a question from Milan, who asked, some places that I apply to ask me if I am an eligible visa holder for the US, Canada, etc. I'm from the EU, so I don't know if this is relevant to me, and I never know what to answer for these remote job opportunities. Now, this is interesting because this is something that I do hear about sometimes from a lot of clients, and I'm actually curious, Milan, what kind of jobs you're applying for, because I can understand if you're applying for like long-term writing positions, like if you're going to be a writer for some publication or some company, I can understand why they would ask that, probably just for legal reasons. But if you're just applying for the kind of jobs, maybe like one-off jobs or writing for publications, I don't really see why they would ask that. Disclaimer: I'm not a lawyer or an immigration expert in any sort of in any sense of the imagination. But what I would say in that case is think about the kind of jobs that you're looking at and try to maybe vary that a bit. So, because I know I've worked with clients from all over the world, and I know that a lot of clients around the world work with some of my clients, and so it's definitely not the case that it matters. And like I said before, location will very rarely matter. I think it's just important to find job opportunities where that doesn't matter. So, in fact, if you haven't used any of the resources that we talked about in the webinar, I would definitely recommend using those, going through our paid publishing guidebook and looking on Google and looking in groups and things like that on job boards, and see if you can find just different sorts of jobs from the ones you're already looking for. And something else I'll notice, or I'll note, is that on some job postings they might make a note about a location. Like I have seen some for either in-house or remote positions where they say like we'd prefer you to be based in the U.S. But generally what people are looking for is being a native English speaker. So that is, I think, the most important thing. I hope I answered that question well. It's a really complex one, and especially because I'm in the U.S. I've worked with clients all over the world. I've never had an experience like the one you had. If I didn't answer your question to the fullest extent, please feel free to email me, and this goes for anyone. Our email is support@writinglunch.com. You can reach us there, and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, or maybe that you think of after the fact. And yeah, Milan, if you have any questions following up, please do email me. I'll try to help you out more. And let's do one more question. This is a really good one to end on. This is from Alethea, I believe. I'm terrible with names, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Who asks, does age matter in freelance writing? And I think this is interesting because I know a lot of you watching are just all over the age spectrum. We usually get people from as young as 16 to as old as 80. So it introduces this really interesting question of doesn't matter. And ultimately, it really doesn't. I think it can matter if you make a big deal out of it. Like if you lead with the fact that you're 17, then like if you say that outright, people may be like a little wary. But like I said, this all goes back to that whole value thing that I talked about earlier, and that is, people want value. They want good writing. If you can deliver that, no one's going to care about where you are in the world or how old you are or, what your favorite book is or something like that. Or, your lifestyle or whatever. It just goes to show that if you focus on that, then everything else kind of falls by the wayside. To give you some context, I started my freelance writing career when I was still in college. I started when I was about 19 or 20, and by the time that I was 22, I had long-term jobs. I was writing for some of the top marketing publications in the world. And the client that I was working with, and it's that same client that I talked about earlier, my long-term client, he never gave me a second thought in terms of age. And I think it goes the same with being older as well. And in fact, that actually might be more beneficial because older people are generally perceived as more wise. But I think definitely if you're younger, the marketplace is a lot friendlier to young people than it used to be, because it used to be before kind of the advent of the internet and before finding jobs online became so easy. Before that, it was kind of hard if you were really young to get taken seriously. But now you can get a professional headshot, get a professional bio written for yourself. It's really easy to put on or to construct a good, positive, mature image of yourself, professional image of yourself, no matter what your age is. And so again, it's just how you present yourself, and it's where you place the focus. And I think that's something I want to leave all of you with is just, when in doubt, place the focus on your value. Don't focus on selling yourself. Focus on selling your benefits. Focus on selling your writing, because that's ultimately what clients and editors really care about. So with all of that said, it's exactly 4 here. I don't want to keep you all too long, but I've had such a blast. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Like I said, if you have any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to email us at support@writinglaunch.com. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can get to, over the next few days. And yeah, we will be sending those bonuses your way: the paid publishing guidebook, the road-tested pitch template, and the guide maximizing your writing time. I hope you enjoy those as well. So with all of that, I think we will call it a day. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really honored that you chose to stick around for an hour with us. And if you're watching during the replay, like I said, feel free to email us and ask us whatever questions you have. So have a great day and keep on writing.